I had always believed that a home was more than four walls and a roof. The house on Sycamore Lane in Asheville, North Carolina, had been mine and my late husband Gerald's greatest achievement, not because of its size or the wraparound porch that faced the Blue Ridge Mountains, but because of what we had poured into it over 4 decades. Every floorboard, every piece of furniture, every framed photograph on the walls held a piece of us. After Gerald passed 2 years ago, it was the only place where I still felt close to him. So when my son called last spring and said he and his wife needed somewhere to stay while their condo in Charlotte was being renovated, I said yes, without hesitation. He was my only child. Of course I said yes. That was 8 months ago. And the renovation, like a bad dream I couldn't shake, showed no signs of ever ending. I noticed the first sign on a Tuesday morning in early October. I came downstairs at 7. The way I always did, to make my coffee and sit by the kitchen window and watch the fog settle over the mountains. It was my ritual, the small, sacred beginning of every day. But when I reached the kitchen, something was wrong. The old percolator Gerald and I had bought at a flea market in Savannah, the one with the dent on the side from when we dropped it on a camping trip in 1987, was gone. In its place sat a sleek chrome espresso machine I had never seen before. I stood there for a moment, confused. The way you feel when something familiar is suddenly absent and your eyes keep searching for it, even though you know it isn't there. My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway behind me, already dressed, her hair perfect, holding her phone like it was an extension of her hand. "Good morning," she said. "I ordered that last week. The old one was practically an antique." I turned slowly. It was an antique. That was the point. She smiled the way she always smiled at me, with her mouth only. "The new one makes better coffee. You'll love it, I promise." I wanted to ask her why she had made that decision without telling me. I wanted to remind her that this was my kitchen, my house, my percolator that I had carried across 6 states over the course of a marriage. But my son walked in then, poured himself a glass of orange juice, and said, "Morning, Mom," without looking up from his own phone. And just like that, the moment passed. That was how it always started. Small things, easy to dismiss. By November, the small things had accumulated into something I could no longer dismiss. My daughter-in-law had replaced the guest towels in the main bathroom with ones she'd ordered from some online boutique, cream-colored and embroidered with a monogram that was not mine. She had moved the wingback chair from the living room, the chair Gerald had sat in every evening, to read, into the garage, because it disrupted the flow of her new furniture arrangement. She had begun having groceries delivered and simply charging them to the household account I had given my son access to for shared expenses. My housekeeper, Ruth, who had worked for me for 11 years, told me quietly one afternoon that my daughter-in-law had started giving her instructions directly. Not requests, instructions. "Ruth, please don't dust the shelves in the living room anymore. Those are decorative pieces, and we prefer not to move them. Ruth, we'll be having guests Friday evening. Please make sure the entryway is presentable." She didn't say please, Ruth told me, folding a dish towel with the careful precision of someone choosing their words carefully too. Not once. I thanked Ruth and told her to continue doing things the way we had always done them. She nodded and went back to work, but I saw the look on her face. The same look I had been seeing in the mirror lately. My son was not cruel. That was what made it so complicated. He wasn't the kind of man who meant harm. He was simply, thoroughly, completely conflict-averse in the way that some men become when they have spent years choosing the path of least resistance. Whatever his wife wanted, he nodded along. Whatever she decided, he explained to me afterward as though it had been a mutual decision, arrived at reasonably. He used words like practical and efficient, and for everyone's comfort, he never used the word no with her, and increasingly, he never used it with himself either. In December, she listed my house on Airbnb. I found out by accident. My neighbor Carol mentioned it over the fence one Saturday morning, casually, the way neighbors do when they assume you already know something. "Oh, I saw the listing for your place," she said. "The photos are beautiful. Are you renting it out for the holidays?" I told Carol I wasn't sure what she was talking about. I went inside and searched the site on my laptop with hands that were not entirely steady. And there it was. My home. My wraparound porch. Gerald's Mountain View. Photographed professionally and listed at $270 a night. Available from December 23rd through January 2nd. The listing description read, charming vintage home in the heart of Asheville. Cozy. Character-filled spaces. Perfect for a mountain retreat. Host is flexible and responsive. She had used the word vintage for the things she had been calling outdated to my face for months. I closed the laptop. I sat very still for a long time. Then I called my attorney. Margaret Holt had been handling my affairs for 15 years. She was direct, unflappable, and did not waste words. I told her what I had found. She asked me 2 questions. Was the listing in my daughter-in-law's name or mine? And had I given anyone written permission to rent the property? The answer to both was no. Margaret told me to send her the link and said she would have a letter drafted by end of day. I was still at my desk when my daughter-in-law came home that afternoon, carrying shopping bags and talking on her phone. She ended her call when she saw my expression. Is something wrong? I turned the laptop to face her. Would you like to explain this? She looked at the screen, and for one brief moment, just one, I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, more like recalculation. It's just a way to bring in some extra income, she said, setting down her bags. The house has so many rooms. You're not using them. We thought it made more sense than letting them sit empty over the holidays. We, I repeated. Daniel and I talked about it, and neither of you thought to talk to me. She sighed in the particular way she had, of making my reasonable objections sound like emotional outbursts. We didn't want to stress you out with the logistics. You always say you don't like to deal with that kind of thing. I had never said that, not once in my life. This is my home, I said, keeping my voice level. My name is on the deed. My name has been on the deed since 1984. You do not have the right to rent it, list it, photograph it, or make any decision about it without my knowledge and my consent. Do you understand that? She crossed her arms. I think you're overreacting. My son came in from the garage at that moment, still in his jacket, reading something on his phone. He looked up and immediately sensed the atmosphere. What's going on? Your wife listed my house on Airbnb, I said, without asking me. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them. In that glance, the private language of a couple who have rehearsed this kind of moment. Mom, he said carefully, it's not a big deal. We were going to tell you. When? After the first guests arrived? It was just an idea. We can take it down. It's already down, I said. My attorney sent a cease and desist letter this afternoon. The room went very quiet. My daughter-in-law's expression changed then. The practiced calm fell away, and what replaced it was something colder. You called your attorney over a website listing? I called my attorney because someone used my property without my authorization. That's not a small thing. That's a legal matter. It's embarrassing, is what it is, she said, her voice sharpening. Treating your own family like strangers, sending legal letters instead of just having a conversation like a normal person. I tried to have conversations, I said. For 8 months, I tried to have conversations. About the furniture. About the groceries. About Ruth. No one was interested in conversations when I was the one asking for them. My son rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, let's all just calm down. I am calm, I said. And it was true. I was extraordinarily calm, the way the sky goes very still before something changes. I'm calmer than I've been in months, actually. My daughter-in-law made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You know what your problem is? You cannot let go. This house, Gerald, the way things used to be, you are so stuck in the past that you can't see that we are trying to help you. We are trying to make this work for everyone, and all you do is throw it back in our faces. Vivienne, my son said, a warning in his voice. She ignored him. She was looking at me with something I can only describe as contempt. Honestly, Daniel and I have talked about this. We think it might be time to consider other arrangements for you. Something smaller, more manageable. There are beautiful communities in Asheville, active senior living, they call it. You'd have people your own age to spend time with. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining all of this. I felt the words land the way a stone lands when you drop it into still water. Everything rippled. Active senior living, I said quietly. It's not an insult, she said briskly, picking up her shopping bags again. It's practical. This house is too much for one person. It always has been. And if you're going to be this difficult about every little decision, Vivian, my son's voice was sharper now. That's enough. She looked at him, surprised. He so rarely used that tone with her, but then he turned to me. And what I saw in his face was not the firmness of a man defending his mother. It was the weariness of a man who wanted the argument to stop. Mom, she didn't mean it like that. Nobody's trying to push you out. This whole thing has just gotten blown out of proportion. Blown out of proportion, I said, very slowly. You know what I mean. I looked at my son. This man I had raised, driven to baseball practice and piano lessons and architecture camp 3 summers in a row. This man whose college tuition I had paid in full, whose wedding I had financed along with Gerald, for whom I had co-signed the loan on the Charlotte condo, currently under renovation. And I saw something I had been trying not to see for a very long time. He was not going to choose me. Not today, and probably not any day. I do know what you mean, I said. I picked up my coffee mug and walked out of the kitchen. Good night. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the room where Gerald and I had slept for 38 years, and I thought about every choice I had made, every moment I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, every time I had told myself it wasn't worth the argument, that family came first, that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. I thought about the percolator in some donation bin somewhere. I thought about the wingback chair in the garage, probably gathering dust next to the lawnmower, and I thought about what she had said, active senior living, said so cleanly, so efficiently, like she was suggesting I upgrade my phone plan. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. Not in anger, the anger had burned off hours ago. I made it in the particular cold clarity that comes when you have run out of excuses to make for people and can finally see them plainly. I reached for my phone and sent Margaret a text. I need to update my will. Can we meet this week? She replied at 7 the next morning, Thursday at 10. My office. My neighbor Carol had introduced me to her daughter Sylvia 2 summers ago at a 4th of July cookout in the backyard. Sylvia was 34, a physical therapist who had recently moved back to Asheville after a decade in Boston. She was warm and funny and had an ease about her that reminded me of the way Gerald could walk into any room and immediately make it feel more comfortable. We had become, over the past year, genuinely close. She came by twice a week, sometimes to help me with the garden, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk. She had been one of the first people I'd called after Gerald died, even though we hadn't known each other long. Something about her had made me feel like I had known her much longer than I had. She was the one I called the morning before my appointment with Margaret. I need to talk through something, I told her. Are you free for coffee? She came over in 20 minutes, and I told her everything. About the Airbnb listing, about what my daughter-in-law had said, about the long, slow 8 months that had led to this moment. Sylvia listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always valued about her. When I finished, she set down her mug and looked at me with the direct, clear gaze of someone who is not going to tell you what you want to hear, just to make you feel better. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to protect what Gerald and I built, I said. And I want my son to understand that choices have consequences. She nodded slowly. Then do that, she said. Whatever that looks like, do it. You don't owe anyone a comfortable inheritance at the cost of your own dignity. I had not cried the night before. I had been too busy thinking, too busy arriving at decisions. But something in the simplicity of what she said made my eyes sting. I'm going to include you in the will, I told her. I want you to know that before I do it. She stared at me. What? Eleanor. No, it's not negotiable, I said. And it's not about obligation or gratitude. It's about who has actually been here. You've been here. Sylvia, you were here when Gerald was in hospice, and I couldn't sleep, and I called you at midnight because I didn't know who else to call. You were here every week this summer, when this house felt like it was being taken apart around me. You've been more family to me than I stopped. You've earned it, that's all." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being what you are." Thursday morning, I sat across from Margaret in her office on Lexington Avenue and told her what I wanted. The house on Sycamore Lane would not go to my son or his wife. It would be donated to the Asheville Land Trust, with the condition that it be maintained as a historic residential property, open to the public during designated hours, with a small permanent exhibition of Gerald's photography. He had been an amateur landscape photographer for 30 years, and the prints hanging in our hallway were some of the most beautiful things I owned. My collection of vintage American quilts, which I had spent decades acquiring, and which my daughter-in-law had once described as a lot of old fabric, would go to the Folk Art Museum downtown that had expressed interest in them on more than one occasion. Ruth would receive a lump sum gift that reflected 11 years of loyalty and kindness, and never once losing her patience. Sylvia would receive the smaller property I owned in Henderson County, a 4-bedroom farmhouse that had belonged to my mother and that I had been renting out for years, which had appreciated considerably and would give her something real and lasting. To my son, I would leave a monthly sum that would allow him to live comfortably, not extravagantly, not at the level his wife had grown accustomed to expecting from my resources, but comfortably. This would continue on one condition: that he and his wife vacate my home within 30 days of my death, and that neither of them contest the will or make any legal challenge to any provision within it. If they chose to challenge, the monthly allowance would cease immediately, and the funds allocated for it would transfer to a scholarship in Gerald's name at the University of North Carolina School of the Art. "Are you certain?" Margaret asked, the way she always did, not to talk me out of anything, but to make sure I was the one deciding. "I haven't been this certain about anything in years," I said. The reading of the will was my idea. Margaret thought it was unusual. Most people these days simply had documents sent to beneficiaries after the fact. But I wanted them there. I wanted them to hear every word read aloud in the same room where Gerald had once hosted Thanksgiving for 20 people, and the table had been so full that we'd had to use TV trays in the hallway. I wanted to see their faces when they understood that a house is not automatically yours just because you've been living in it and treating it like it already is. I told my son and my daughter-in-law that Margaret would be coming to the house on Saturday morning for a formal meeting regarding estate planning, and that their presence was required. I told them nothing else. Margaret arrived at 10. Sylvia arrived at 5 too. Ruth was in the kitchen, which was where she preferred to be during uncomfortable situations, and which I respected. My son and his wife came downstairs together, my daughter-in-law, in a silk blouse. I suspect it cost more than Ruth's weekly salary, my son with the same anxious, anticipatory energy he'd had since childhood whenever he sensed that something was coming and didn't know what. We sat in the living room. Margaret, composed as always, set her reading glasses on the bridge of her nose and opened the folder. "I'm here at the request of Eleanor Jane Calloway," she began, "for the formal reading of her updated will, executed on the 14th of this month." My daughter-in-law looked at my son. He looked at his hands. Margaret read carefully, methodically, giving equal weight to each provision. When she reached the section about the house, the part about the land trust, the part about Gerald's photographs being displayed publicly, my son looked up sharply. When she reached the quilt collection going to the museum, my daughter-in-law made a small sound, quickly suppressed. When she reached Ruth's gift, I saw my daughter-in-law's jaw tighten. When she reached Sylvia's name and the Henderson County property, my daughter-in-law stood up. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice had gone very flat, the way voices do when someone is working very hard to control them. "Did you just say that your neighbor's daughter gets the farmhouse?" "Please sit down," Margaret said evenly. "I'm not finished. I don't care if you're finished. I want to understand what I'm hearing. You are leaving a property worth, please. Sit down." Margaret's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. There was 30 years of courtrooms in it. My daughter-in-law sat, barely, Margaret continued. When she reached the provision about my son's monthly allowance and the conditions attached to it, the room went so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway. When she read the clause about what would happen if anyone chose to legally challenge the will, my daughter-in-law let out a sharp breath. "That's it," Margaret said, closing the folder. "Are there any questions?" There was a long silence. Then my daughter-in-law turned to my son. Her face had gone through several colors in the past 10 minutes. It had landed somewhere between pale and dangerous. "Say something," she said. He was looking at me. Not at Margaret, not at the folder, not at his wife, at me. And I saw in his face something I had not seen from him in a very long time. He looked, for a moment, like the boy he used to be, the one who cried in the car after Gerald's funeral and pretended he hadn't when we got home. The one who used to bring me dandelions as a child with such earnest pride that I had pressed every single one into a notebook I still kept somewhere in this house. "Mom," he said quietly, "is this because of the listing? Because of what Vivian said?" "It's because of 8 months," I said. "The listing was the last of it, not the whole of it. We can fix this. We can talk about—" "I told Sylvia about this before I did it," I said. "I gave her the chance to tell me if she thought I was wrong. She didn't. And Margaret has known me for 15 years, and she didn't either." I looked at my son steadily. "You are my child, and I will love you until I die. But love is not the same as complicity, and I have spent far too long confusing the two. This is insane." My daughter-in-law's voice had shed all pretense of control. "You are giving our inheritance. Do you understand what that house is worth? What the farmhouse is worth? You are giving it away to strangers because you're angry about a website listing. That is insane. It is vindictive and petty, and the Airbnb listing was evidence," I said calmly, "not the cause. The cause was a long time in the making. We could have made this work," she said. And now there was something almost raw in her voice, though I wasn't sure whether it was genuine or tactical. "We were trying to help you. We were trying to make this house work for everyone. You were trying to make this house work for you," I said. "There's a difference. And I think somewhere, you've always known that." She looked at my son. He looked at the floor. "If you challenge this will," Margaret said, addressing them both with a matter-of-fact clarity that left no room for negotiation, "the monthly provision ceases, the scholarship fund receives those assets instead, and any legal challenge will be a matter of public record. I would encourage you to take some time and think carefully about your next steps." My daughter-in-law made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. She pushed back from her chair and walked out of the room. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heavy and fast, and then the sound of a door closing harder than it needed to. My son did not follow her immediately. He sat there another moment, and I let him. "Did she know?" he finally asked. "Sylvia? Did she know you were going to do this?" I told her beforehand, yes, out of respect. He nodded slowly. "The farmhouse is a good property, solid." "I know," I said. "I've owned it for 27 years. Another silence. Then, Dad would have. He stopped. "Dad would have done exactly what I did," I said gently. "Just sooner." He nodded again. He stood up, smoothed his jacket with the automatic gesture he'd had since he was a teenager whenever he didn't know what to do with his hands. He looked at me one last time, something complicated moving across his face, and then he walked out too. Margaret stayed for another 30 minutes to finalize a few details. Sylvia sat beside me the whole time, quiet and steady. When Margaret left, we stayed in the living room in the late morning light, the mountains faint and blue through the window, the room looking more like itself than it had in months. "How do you feel?" Sylvia asked. I thought about it honestly. "Strange," I said. "Like something that needed to break has finally broken. And now I'm waiting to see what grows in its place." She nodded. From upstairs came the sounds of my daughter-in-law moving around with purpose drawers opening, the roll of luggage wheels across hardwood, my son's lower voice, measured and quiet, in contrast to her sharper responses. The two of them negotiating their exit the same way, I suspected. They had negotiated everything, with her setting the terms and him accommodating them. Ruth appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, real coffee. the kind from the old-fashioned drip machine I had bought to replace the espresso machine the week before. "Will you be needing anything else this morning, Mrs. Calloway?" she asked, with the particular quiet dignity she had maintained through every strange month of the past year. "No, Ruth," I said. "Thank you for everything." She smiled a small, knowing smile and went back to the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the mug and looked out at the mountains. Gerald had loved this view so much that in the last months of his illness, when he couldn't walk up to the overlook anymore, he had set up his camera on the porch and taken hundreds of photographs of it from that angle. Some of them were his best work. All of them would be displayed, eventually, in a room that strangers could walk into and stand quietly in front of and feel something, even without knowing his name or his story or what it had cost us to build a life worth photographing. That felt right to me. That felt like the truest kind of continuity. By mid-afternoon, the house was quiet again, in a way it hadn't been for 8 months. The suitcases were loaded into the car. My daughter-in-law did not say goodbye. My son stopped in the hallway on his way out, and we stood facing each other for a moment without speaking. And then he put his arms around me briefly, the way he used to when he was young and didn't yet know how to say the hard things. "I'll call you," he said. "I hope you will," I said. And I meant it. I stood on the porch and watched the car back down the driveway and turn onto Sycamore Lane and disappear around the bend. Sylvia stood beside me. The afternoon light was doing what it always did at this time of year in Asheville, turning the mountains a deep, warm amber that Gerald had called borrowed gold because he said it only lasted a few minutes and you had to pay attention or you'd miss it entirely. I paid attention. After a while, Sylvia went inside to help Ruth with dinner. I stayed on the porch a little longer, in the rocking chair that had always been mine and that no one had managed to replace yet. And I thought about what came next. There was work to do. The house needed attention. Real attention. The kind it hadn't received while I'd been busy managing other people's comfort. I had quilts to catalog and donate, photographs to organize and frame, a conversation to have with the land trust, letters to write, in Gerald's name, establishing the scholarship that would eventually fund a young person's education and probably change their life in ways neither of us could predict. There was plenty of living left to do. I had never doubted that, not for a single day. The light shifted, the mountains went blue again, quiet and enormous and indifferent to the small human dramas playing out at their feet, which was, I had always thought, one of the most comforting things about them. I picked up my coffee. It had gone slightly cold, but I drank it anyway, and it was exactly what I needed.